Have you ever agreed to a social invitation that you were, like, secretly dreading the exact moment the words left your mouth?
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Or perhaps even more painfully, have you ever sat completely silent in a meeting, just kind of nodding along, when you vehemently disagreed with the consensus in the room?
Yeah, I mean, it is a profoundly universal human instinct. We essentially compromise our own reality just for the sake of the room's comfort.
And today, we are going to figure out why we do that and, well, more importantly, how to systematically stop doing it.
Yeah.
So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are pulling from a really wild stack of research today.
We really are.
It's everything from clinical therapy workbooks from MySafeTherapy, the ReachLink Guide to Authenticity, leadership studies from the HRW Institute and Harvard Business Review, to psychological research from the University of Southampton, and even like some deep philosophy on the fragmented self by John Cottingham.
It's a massive spectrum of material, and I find this so interesting, every single source circles the exact same core tension, which is this invisible, exhausting gap between who we actually are and how we are choosing to live on a daily basis.
Exactly. So our mission for you today is to unpack the practical daily techniques you can use to align your personal actions with your core values.
Hmm.
And I want to set the tone immediately here. This isn't about, looking in the mirror and reciting positive affirmations.
No, not at all.
We are talking about the concrete, sometimes incredibly uncomfortable mechanics of becoming a fully integrated person.
Right, because in a world that constantly rewards conformity, staying true to yourself isn't like a permanent state of enlightenment that you just magically unlock one day.
Yeah, you don't just check a box.
Exactly. It's a behavioral practice. It requires ongoing, deliberate maintenance.
So let's start with the problem itself, which the psychological literature refers to as the divided self, or basically the problem of the mask. According to the research, a vast majority of us unconsciously mask our true selves to gain social acceptance or just to, lubricate social friction. We think we're being highly strategic.
But the irony is how spectacularly that strategy fails in the real world. The Harvard Business Review piece on building trust is a perfect example of this.
Well, the job interview study.
Yes. They studied high-stakes situations like job interviews where people frequently mask their true personalities to appear as the quote-unquote ideal candidate. They curate every single answer. But by doing that, they engage in the exact type of behavior that statistically tanks their chances of getting hired.
Because the interviewer senses that something is off, right? Like the HBR research points out that trust relies on empathy, logic, and authenticity. But I really want to talk about how that actually works in the room. When you're sitting across from someone who is masking, they develop what the researchers call an authenticity wobble.
The authenticity wobble, the mechanics of that are just fascinating to me. It all comes down to cognitive load.
Right.
When you are masking, your brain is essentially working overtime. You aren't just answering a question. You are filtering your natural response, calculating what the interviewer wants to hear, and then manufacturing an artificial response.
It's like running too many background apps on your phone.
Exactly. And that heavy mental processing creates micro delays. Your body language becomes slightly rigid. Your vocal tone might subtly detach from your facial expressions. And the interviewer's subconscious picks up on that incongruity immediately. They might not know why they don't trust you, but the trust signal is totally broken.
It is so wild to think about that on a biological level. The person across the table can literally see the lag in your processing. And the psychological toll of carrying that mask isn't just a lost job opportunity. It's a loss of self. There's a fascinating study from the University of Southampton that looked at adolescence through the lens of self-determination theory. And they found that when we lack autonomy, meaning the freedom to make choices that actually align with our inner values, our subjective well-being absolutely plummets.
Yeah, the Southampton researchers explain that when our basic psychological needs for autonomy and competence aren't met, we actually feel a stronger defensive urge to distance ourselves from who we really are.
Wow.
Right. We lean harder into the mask because the true self feels too vulnerable to expose.
We fake it to survive. But the danger is that the mask gets glued on so tightly over the years that you completely forget it's there. And this brings us to the ReachLink sources. They provided a fantastic self-assessment checklist to figure out if you are stuck in this loop.
It's a tough checklist to go through.
It is. I want you, listening right now, to just mentally check off these questions. Do you constantly use self-deprecation as a strategy to fit in? Do you conceal important aspects of your identity, your hobbies, or your beliefs for fear of rejection? And This is the really heavy one. Are your relationships built around your values, or have you adapted to the values of the people around you just to avoid being alone?
Answering yes to those questions is a very difficult pill to swallow. I mean, it forces you to look at your own complicity in your unhappiness.
If you're answering yes, you suddenly realize just how much energy you are wasting. I think of masking like wearing a pair of incredibly expensive shoes that are exactly one size too small.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Like you can walk in them, you can get through your workday, and everyone might tell you how great you look. But every single step requires microscopic endurance. By the time you get home, you are completely drained, you're irritable, and you might not even realize it's because you've been compensating for the shoes all day.
Right. The friction of inauthenticity constantly drains your cognitive and emotional reserves. But to take your analogy a step further, if we want to take those tight shoes off, we first have to figure out the actual organic shape of our feet.
Yeah.
How do we discover what our true values are underneath decades of social conditioning?
That is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
Because I feel like corporate culture has kind of ruined the concept of values. We think it means picking three nice-sounding words off a whiteboard, like synergy or excellence.
Or meaningless buzzwords.
Exactly. But the ReachLink Guide argues that finding your values requires constructing a narrative arc for self-discovery. You have to essentially be the archaeologist of your own life.
Which means you don't find your values by looking at aspirations. You find them by looking at your history. You have to reflect on pivotal, high-emotion experiences.
Yeah.
Like looking at your emotional responses during moments of profound grief. Or look at the principles that guided you when you achieved something incredibly difficult. Consider a time you stood completely alone against popular opinion. What was so fundamentally important to you in that moment that you were willing to risk social isolation? The spikes in your emotional history map directly onto your core values.
Okay, so let's talk about how the professionals guide people through this archaeological dig. If someone walks into a therapist's office feeling totally disconnected from their life, what are the actual mechanics of the treatment? Like, what happens in the room?
So, licensed therapists rely on evidence-based reflection techniques that force clarity. They might use something called values card sorting, which physically forces you to prioritize a massive stack of values down to a non-negotiable top 5.
Oh, that's not stressful.
It is. It really makes you choose. They also use motivational interviewing, which is a technique designed to resolve ambivalence by having the therapist ask highly targeted questions that make the client articulate their own internal drives. But the heavy lifting usually happens through cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, and acceptance and commitment therapy, known as ACT.
Let's break those down because I know they operate very differently. CBT, as I understand it, is highly mechanical.
Very much so.
It's about rewiring the link between a trigger and an automatic thought. Like, if your core value is connection, but your automatic thought at a party is, nobody here wants to talk to me. CBT helps you intercept and challenge that fabricated thought before it dictates your behavior.
Precisely. CBT targets the distortion in your thinking. ACT, on the other hand, takes a completely different angle. ACT utilizes a process called cognitive diffusion.
Diffusion.
Right? Instead of fighting or challenging the negative thought, you simply unhook from it. You observe it as a piece of passing data. And the MySafeTherapy workbooks highlight that ACT treats values not as goals to be achieved, but as a compass.
I love the compass concept because you don't ever achieve north. You don't check north off a to-do list. You just use it to constantly steer the ship. When your actions drift away from your values, it's not a catastrophic moral failure. It's just raw data telling you to adjust the wheel.
It frames authenticity as a direction you live into, choice by choice, rather than a test you pass or fail.
Okay, I want to push back on this whole therapeutic framework for a second, though.
Sure.
We're talking about licensed therapists, CBT, ACT.
Yeah.
Does everyone really need to hire a professional to figure out who they are? I worry that if we make self-discovery a clinical process, we risk turning it into an endless navel-gazing exercise. At what point does digging into your past become an excuse to obsess over yourself instead of actually living your life?
That is a highly valid critique. The risk of endless self-reflection is absolute paralysis. And to answer your question, no, professional therapy is not the only path. The philosopher John Cottingham addresses this beautifully in his essay on the fragmented self.
Right, I wanted to get into Cottingham.
Drawing heavily on psychoanalysts like Carl Jung, Cottingham argues that psychological harmony can absolutely be achieved through independent, rigorous self-scrutiny. But he warns that it is painful, unglamorous work.
Because you aren't just looking at your highlight reel. You have to look at the ugly stuff.
Exactly. Jung called it acknowledging your own thing of darkness. Cottingham points out that our divided self is often driven by unconscious, darker impulses, petty jealousies, a need for control, or deep-seated feels of inadequacy. Integrity isn't about pretending those dark parts don't exist.
Right.
It's about dragging them to the surface, understanding how they influence your actions, and integrating them so they no longer control you from the shadows.
Okay, so assuming we do the hard work, we find our compass, we face our darkness, how do we translate that onto the ground? Let's say it's a Tuesday afternoon, my inbox is overflowing, and I am incredibly stressed. How do I steer the ship?
The foundation of daily practice comes from Lillian So's framework, which she calls radical honesty.
Let's clarify her definition of that. Because usually when someone says, I'm just being radically honest, it's basically a precursor to them saying something incredibly offensive and masking it as a virtue.
Yes, unfortunately true.
But Lillian So says radical honesty has nothing to do with blurting out your every thought to other people. It is entirely about minimizing the lies you tell yourself.
And the most profound part of her framework is that radical honesty does not start in the brain, it starts in the body.
Really?
We spend our entire adult lives learning how to numb and ignore our physical signals, but the nervous system always knows the truth before the conscious mind does. Your gut feeling, your muscle tension, your fatigue, these are objective truths.
I can actually give a pretty messy real-world example of this.
Please do.
So a few years ago, I valued ambition so highly that I completely ignored my body's signals. I would work out at 5 a.m. even when I was running on like 3 hours of sleep and my joints ached. I was lying to myself about my physical capacity because the narrative of being a hustler was louder than my biology. Lillian So would say that ignoring that exhaustion is a fundamental lack of integrity.
That is spot on. And the same applies to overeating to soothe work anxiety or, pouring a drink because you don't want to sit with the discomfort of a quiet house. You are masking the physical reality. Honoring those biological truths is step one. But the crucial second step is distinguishing between mindful noticing and judgmental thinking.
This is where it clicks for me. Because the trap is, the second I pay attention to a feeling, my brain immediately spins a massive catastrophic story around it. The sources use the example of a glass of water to explain the mechanics of this,
I
right?
do, yes.
Objective noticing is simply observing reality. I notice there's a glass of water on the table.
But subjective, judgmental thinking takes that objective fact and initiates a cascade of fabricated panic. Like, I need to drink more water. If I don't, I'm going to be dehydrated. If I'm dehydrated, I'll get a headache. If I get a headache, I'm going to bomb my presentation this afternoon, and my career will suffer.
We literally attach a hypothetical apocalypse to a glass of water.
Yes.
So how do we use radical honesty to strip the narrative away from something heavier, like social anxiety?
When the anxiety hits, radical honesty requires you to report the objective state of your nervous system. You say to yourself, I am noticing a tightness in my chest. I am noticing that I feel anxious right now. That is the absolute truth. The judgmental thinking is the story you invent to explain the anxiety.
Like, I don't belong in this meeting. Everyone thinks I'm a fraud.
Exactly, or I'm going to get fired.
The narrative is entirely fabricated, but the physical anxiety is real. So diffusing it means sticking only to the facts. I notice I want to run away. It grounds you in reality.
Sure.
But, and this brings up a massive practical challenge. Let's say I'm radically honest with myself. I drop the narrative. But I still have to exist in society.
Right.
What happens when my internal integrity violently clashes with external social pressure? Let's talk about the Thanksgiving table. You are sitting across from a family member who casually states a belief that fundamentally violates your core values regarding social equality. Do you just flip the table in the name of authenticity?
The instinct might be to flip the table, sure, but the research suggests a much more nuanced approach to preserving integrity. The ReachLink Guide emphasizes that living authentically does not require you to become a martyr.
Oh, that's a relief.
You have a spectrum of strategies. The first is establishing unshakable conversational boundaries. You can maintain the familial relationship while calmly stating, I absolutely do not agree with that, and we are not discussing this topic today.
So you remove the fuel, not the whole relationship.
Exactly. Another strategy is to channel that energy into advocating for your beliefs in environments where it actually moves the needle rather than screaming at a brick wall. However, the sources also make it clear that sometimes the most authentic choice, The one that truly protects your core values is making the agonizing decision to limit or cut contact with toxic individuals.
Yeah, because protecting your mental well-being is a value-aligned action.
Precisely.
That distinction connects perfectly to a concept from the MySafeTherapy workbook that completely changed how I view relationships. They talk about using your values as bridges versus using them as filters.
This is such an important concept.
A filter is basically a purity test.
Mhm.
If you use your values as a filter, you are demanding that everyone else pass your specific ideological exam before you let them into your life.
And if you apply a strict filter to the entire world, you will end up completely isolated, surrounded only by an echo chamber of your own making.
But the alternative is using your values as a bridge. A bridge dictates how you show up in the world, regardless of how others behave. Let's say one of your core values is respect. If you use it as a bridge, you treat your employees with profound respect, even on days they mess up. You are reliable. That reliability acts as a bridge that naturally draws people toward you because they feel safe.
It shifts authenticity from a weapon you use to judge people into a standard you hold yourself to. And the data actually backs up the effectiveness of this. The HRW Institute's research on moral leadership found that 84% of employees who work in organizations that actively prioritize human connection feel deep pride in their work.
Wow, 84%.
Yeah. When leaders act on shared values when they build bridges, they generate immense trust and loyalty.
But I want to throw a philosophical wrench into this whole discussion. We've been talking about living your truth and being authentic as if it is inherently a positive thing. John Cottingham's essay raises a brilliant counter-argument. He poses the problem of the authentic crook.
It is a devastating critique of modern self-help culture.
Right. Let's imagine a corrupt politician. He doesn't mask. He is completely integrated, totally honest with himself about the fact that his core values are greed, manipulation, and power. He's acting in perfect alignment with his internal compass. So by modern definitions of wholeheartedness and self-authorship, he is living an authentic life. So is authenticity always good?
Cottingham argues that it absolutely is not. We have elevated you into the ultimate cultural virtue, assuming that as long as you are true to yourself, you are somehow absolved of moral responsibility.
Exactly.
But the authentic crook proves that internal consistency is not enough. True integrity requires bringing our personal projects into alignment with objective external goods, things like justice, compassion, and truth.
We don't get to just invent reality. We can't say, well, my truth is that stealing is fine.
Right, and if we look at the psychological research from Blaine Fowers on human flourishing, we discover that this philosophical idea is actually baked into our biology. Fowers introduces the concept of the expanded self.
This is where Fowers brings in the neuroscience. The research on the anterior cingulate cortex completely blew my mind.
The neuroscience perfectly illustrates this point. So the anterior cingulate cortex, or the ACC, is a region of the brain that registers physical pain like if you touch a hot stove. But neuroscientists have found that the exact same region of the brain lights up when we experience social rejection or isolation.
That is incredible. Evolution literally wired our brains to process social isolation as physical damage.
Because for early humans, being kicked out of the tribe meant death. We are inextricably bound to one another. So Fowers argues that your identity isn't just an isolated bubble. Your expanded self includes the groups, communities, and relationships you belong to. Aristotle called it koinonia, good fellowship.
Which perfectly solves the problem of the authentic crook. If your version of authenticity harms the community, it is fundamentally flawed. You are violating the biological reality of your expanded self. True integrity means your authentic actions must positively contribute to the whole.
It demands that your inner compass points towards something larger than your own ego.
So let's tie all of these threads together for you listening. What is the roadmap? First, you have to recognize the cognitive and emotional drain of the mask. Those shoes that are one size too small are destroying your peace of mind. Second, you have to become the archaeologist of your own narrative. Look at the emotional spikes of your past to identify your true values and use them as a compass, not a checklist.
Third, practice Lillian So's radical honesty. Start by honoring your body's physical signals. When anxiety or discomfort arises, practice objective noticing. Acknowledge the physical reality without spinning a catastrophic judgmental narrative around it.
And finally, externalize it. Commit to at least one value-aligned action every single day to build the integrity muscle. Set boundaries when the social pressure gets toxic, and make sure you are using your values as bridges to connect with your expanded self rather than filters to isolate yourself.
I want to leave you with one final provocative thought drawn from the Harvard Business Review research. We spend so much of our lives hiding our unique differences. We suppress our unconventional viewpoints, our quirks, the friction of our true personalities, because we assume the world wants us to be easy to digest. We think we are doing everyone a favor by blending in.
We shrink ourselves to keep the peace.
But what if you were looking at it completely backward? What if, by wearing the mask, you are actively depriving the world of the exact thing it needs most from you? Consider the possibility that the environments you navigate every single day, your office, your family dynamic, your community, are stagnant or suffering because they are missing the specific, authentic friction that only your unmasked self can provide.
Let that thought sit with you the next time you find yourself biting your tongue, just to keep the room comfortable. Until next time, keep diving deep.